Is your voice heard in this?
Yes, both of our voices are in this. Yeah.
Great, perfect.
Awesome. Cool. So hello, everyone. My name is Ron. I am the program coordinator for Planet in Focus. Today, I'm really honored to be joined by Andrew Nisker, a filmmaker, as well as a longtime friend of the festival. His past films include Dark Side of the True, Ground War, and Coral Ghosts. And today we're going to be here talking a bit about his filmmaking process, as well as how that can hopefully help you as you make your film in this Eco Film Lab project. So Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Ron, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, so well, let's jump right into it. The first thing I want to start with is about the kind of stories that you tell. So you tell very personal stories. Well, at least I feel they're very, very personal stories, but you turn them into a very informative documentary, like things with Dark Side of the True or Ground War, both come from very personal places. I'm wondering if you could talk about how you turn something personal into an informative, factual-based documentary.
Well, I think, a lot of times they say to writers, write what you know. And for me, I try to pick things that I'm really passionate about, things that interest me in learning more about. So, I'm an expert I'm not an expert on any of the subjects that tell my stories about until the stories are told. But even then, I'm still not an expert. I'm consulting with experts all along, and the really, like, the passion, you have to have passion for your story, just like the reason why you even become a filmmaker. You have to sacrifice so much to do this, so you better love what you're doing. And so I've always had a passion for making films, and had a passion for uh, the art of filmmaking. And when it comes to documentaries, the subjects sort of through the series of my work have been piggybacking one on the other. So one leads to another to another. I couldn't have told you when I made my first film, Garbage, that I would make Coral Ghosts, 15 years later. It's just something that, there's a connection between all of them.
Absolutely. And I think that's very helpful for, like, especially students and teachers, like what you said about you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you pick something you're passionate about and learn about it on the way.
That's
Absolutely.
correct.
Yeah. So your films, I think, take a very, if I may say, investigative journalistic style where, as you just said, like you are learning and discovering things as you make the movie. Can you tell us a bit about how you research an issue once you have a topic? How do you actually go about researching it?
Well, a lot of it becomes into deep diving into uh, science reports, environmental reports, speaking with some of the leading people who are authorities on the subjects that I'm looking to investigate. And a lot of times, as I develop those connections, more avenues open up, and it's well, I guess it's like the old expression, finding the rabbit, going down the rabbit hole, and it's become much easier, obviously, with Google. Not that I trust anything that's on Google or on the internet at face value, but it helps sort of form a picture of, first of all, what's out there, and second of all, what isn't out there, what's new to tell, because that's really important for audiences. I mean, there's been an explosion of films made about climate change since I first started making films about climate change. I think it wasn't even called climate change when I started making my films. And how are you going to add to that conversation, and how are you going to add to that conversation in a way that's going to engage audiences to want to watch what you're saying? Because at the end of the day, what you are doing, you're very fortunate to be able to do that, and you're be giving an opportunity, and you have to look at it that way, that you don't want to squander it, and you want to really make sure that your voice and what you're saying and what you're researching and how you research your subjects and how it's being presented is in a way that is unique and different than other things that are out there. Or it continues the conversation where the conversation had stopped with a previous story, film, article, research.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of saying like a research on a sort of unique angle, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about Dark Side of the True, because definitely, like, watching that film, for audiences that don't know, it's a film about, it starts with about chewing gum essentially, and then you expand into this much deeper conversation about like the chemicals and the waste and all that stuff. And I definitely found that to be like a very unique way of talking about the environment. Could you talk a bit about researching that film?
Sure. Well, Dark Side of the Chew came really from like just a little statistic that I came across when making my film Garbage. In my film Garbage, The Revolution Starts at Home, I had a family keep their trash for 3 months. And the reason I did that is I wanted everyone to self-reflect and think about the trash that they create and how they could do better with reducing the pollution that they create. And one little statistic that I came up across was that cigarette butts are the #1 form of litter in the world. And #2 is chewing gum. So for things that people toss away. And it seems very benign on its surface. Again, it's looking into the research. But cleaning up chewing gum globally costs, back when I made the film almost 8 years ago, over $1 billion a year is being spent. Money that could be spent on reducing poverty or coming up with new techniques to green the environment. It's being spent to simply clean up chewing gum all over the world in different municipalities. And the reason for that is because chewing gum is made of a polymer. It's non-biodegradable. And when it hits concrete, it sticks to it. And all those black spots you see on concrete is chewing gum. And so I thought, wow, that's unbelievable that we're spending all this money and all these resources on getting rid of chewing gum. And in addition to that, when you clean it off, the story doesn't get any better. It's not like they scoop it up. Generally, they steam it off and it goes onto the street, and then it just goes into the sewer system, which ends up being flushed, if it's rainwater in a lot of municipalities, into the watershed. So the life cycle of gum is a fascinating story. And I thought that that's a topic and a story that kids would really relate to. So that's really, was my driving point. I have children, and I'm looking to create things that children would really, enjoy and be engaged with watching it, be good for the classroom. And it's a great life cycle story. So that's why I decided to make a film about chewing gum. And believe me, it wasn't easy to sell at first, because they thought, again, that's when I go in and would pitch it to the broadcasters, would be like, you're coming here, you have this great opportunity to tell a big story, and you're squandering it on a story about chewing gum. What gives? And of course, when I explained the whole story, like, well, that's kind of cool. Yeah, let's tell that story. So, and I also think it's, like death and taxes, chewing gum is something everyone around the world can relate to. And some places are much more progressive about dealing with the pollution of it than others. Like Singapore, you can't even, if you spit gum at it, it's a huge, you can be thrown in jail. And even Walt Disney knew that gum was bad. He wouldn't allow people to chew gum in his amusement parks, mainly because it costs so much money to clean up, and it's dirty and disgusting. So, believe it or not, it gets people, it gets people very upset. Chewing gum. Some people hate it. So with a passion. So anyways, I thought that's a great story. And that's a good example, because we've had amazing success with that film on TV. I think it's one of their top documentaries. And I was contacted to do a TEDx talk on it. So all of a sudden, the film becomes a TEDx talk, and there's more interested in the subject. And, I think that's like one of the more well-known films that I've made, believe it or not. And it's about chewing gum.
Well, it just proves that sometimes funders need to see the final film, and then things happen. I wanted to go back to what you were saying about making the film sort of like appealing to kids, or at least like to a sort of much larger audience. Because one of the things that struck me about Dark Side of the Chew was precisely the way the narration was written, and how it's like meant to be a little cheeky or like entertaining. And I think a lot of our the students and teachers making these short films are also interested in perhaps like having a bit of narration. I'm wondering if you could give some tips on how you write your own narration, so that it's not just like dry fact stating.
Yeah, my background actually was a comedy writer. When I graduated film school, I intended to be, making the next Superbad. That's really what I wanted to do. Really do fun, goofy, broad comedies. And so while I was on that course and I was continuing to pitch and make in screenwrite and actually work with the creators of Saturday Night Live, who took me right out of school and gave me a contract to write for them a couple films, which were never ended up being made. I also was very, between, I'm two extremes. I can be the funny guy and I can be the very serious, earnest guy. And so the earnest side of me wanted to make documentaries. And when I saw Michael Moore's film Roger and Me, which is his first film, which is a combination of satire and also, documentary style, very investigative, impactful, serious subject storytelling, I thought that's what I want to do. That hits the mark perfectly. And so when I went to make the film Garbage, which I did on my own, I bootstrapped it. I had a camera, I had an edit system, and I went and told the stories, and my friends volunteered to keep their trash. I approached it that way with writing the narration. So I guess really, I have a passion for writing and making things entertaining, and sometimes, some people may not have that skill, so it's important to assess what you're strong at. You might be a very good investigative person, but you don't have a funny bone in you, or you have a hard time writing in a way that makes it, move, get punches up, gets the audience engaged. So there's nothing wrong with finding a stand-up comedian and working with them, give them the film or the script or the idea and say, can we collaborate? And have them punch it up. Here we can do some funny things here. It's funny scenes. The scenes, it's all about scenes, really. In my opinion, there's no difference between a fiction film and a nonfiction film if you script it out, that you want to have scenes that are well crafted and engaged and come up with the narrative of that scene before you go out and shoot it. And you can create, at least my type of films, you can create entertainment or find the funny in it through the situation. So with Dark Side of the Chew, I just thought the opening was a kind of a twist on a bit of Indiana Jones, where I'm on the back of a truck and I'm in the middle of the Mayan rainforest and I have a machete and I'm jumping out, and it's very serious and serious music playing, and I'm hacking through the jungle, and then all of a sudden I'm there. You think I'm there to conquer some beast, and I'm there to harvest chewing gum. So, and then I just played along with that, that character. But also find that the people that we speak to in the field too, like, you can't write for this, but the people you speak to in the field, because I'm in that film in particular, some films I'm not in them, they have good information and they might be good on camera, but you got to kind of be an agent provocateur. You got to prod them and poke them and get them to tell you that information in a fun way, that's easy for you to put together, by being playful and fun with them, just like you might be with someone you're meeting on the street. But it's not an interview, it's a conversation. I don't like interviews, I like conversations, and to me that works much better. Interviews very stodgy. You're sitting there, tell me this, looking at a piece of paper. I want a conversation happening, and one that we can move around. I don't want to be sitting in a chair. I want to be doing things. I want activities. I want experiments. I want to see stuff happen on screen, and that way people remember, remember this.
Yeah. And speaking of this sort of conversation, in Dark Side of the Tree, you interview you have a conversation with a lot of different, a lot of range of people. You have the science experts that you were just mentioning, but you also at one point run your sort of quasi-scientific elementary school focus group, where you have divide them into 3 groups, some eating chewing gum and some not, to do an exam. I'm wondering if you can talk about how you choose what people you go and talk with, and how that changes as you make the film.
Well, we pre-interview people. We may see video of them on YouTube of other things they've done, but we definitely try and cast people that will be good on camera, and because there's nothing worse than people heading to the washroom or leaving the theater because of a really long, boring interview. And so that with that particular classroom, that was my son's classroom, and a lot of that was in editing. It wasn't really a lot of interviews. It was more the kids doing things, and you never go wrong with kids. Like, kids are always, they're the best characters. They have a lot of fun. Most of them have no filter. They'll give it all and have a lot of fun with it, especially if you play along with them. And so and that experiment was based on a study that was put out by the Wrigley Institute that that made multiple medical claims about the virtues of chewing gum, which I thought, when you read it through, I mean, that was put out 30, 40 years ago, that this is not real. This is kind of fake advertising, and what the information that the things that they're claiming about their products, like, let's put that to a test. Like, is it going to improve your memory? Or are you going to become more focused? So that's why we put that together. We thought we'd put it to the test and have some chew gum, have not chew gum, compare test scores. And we wanted to pick apart that particular study, and that was one way to do it.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about Dark Side of the Chew. I guess I also want to talk a bit about your other films, but specifically maybe Ground War, to talk about one that has a much more sort of serious subject matter to it. I'm wondering if you could start by first telling us a bit about what Ground War is and sort of the inspiration behind that. And then I also have some questions about how you researched that film, but we can start with what it is.
Sure. Ground War is actually a longer version of a film I made called Dad and the Dandelions, which was an episode of The Nature of Things, which is a science program on the CBC, hosted by David Suzuki. When I found out that my father was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I was devastated, but I was also very curious to know, more so than ever in my life, how did my dad get this disease? I wanted to know more about the disease. And so really the film is sort of investigating non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and investigating and also a journey into showing that answers aren't easy. We don't know a lot of the answers to these questions, and here's why we don't know the answers to these questions. And then it also took me down a different path, because what I ended up making a connection to, what I thought was the main culprit in his life, was his exposure to pesticides, which is what one of the leading medical authorities in the United States, Mayo Clinic, says, that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is caused by two things, probable things. One being exposure to pesticides, and the other is a secondary cancer from getting chemotherapy. So you develop non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after having chemotherapy for other cancers. And so my dad didn't fit the number one bill, but the number two bill, with exposure to pesticides, I wondered, like, where would he be exposed to pesticides? And so I went down that path and looked at his life. And I made the film just after he passed away. And I concluded that it was his exposure on the golf course, because his thing that he loved to do and he was known for was his passion for golf, and he golfed probably over 200 days a year. So, and he golfed at the same place generally 99% of the time. And so I was able to pull up and find the pesticide use reports on his golf course and find out what chemicals he was being exposed to. And from my experience making my previous film, Orange Witness, there was one chemical in particular that I was intrigued by, which was 2,4-D, which is a chemical that's one of the two chemicals that's used in Agent Orange. And Agent Orange was a chemical that was used during the war in Vietnam to defoliate the forests. And 2,4-D, when I researched that chemical, there is a probable cause that it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, going through all this, could I prove it? Like, why are they doing, that's the whole film goes into that background. And like I was saying earlier, one part of the story leads to another part of the story because you more and more questions are raised.
Mhm.
And that and the dandelions, when I went to pitch it to the CBC, they've been looking for probably a decade for a story to tell around the danger of using these cosmetic pesticides which were used just to make your lawns look beautiful.
Mhm.
Like, is it worth the damage that that's causing to the environment just so you don't have dandelions? And so they thought, okay, and that's what I'm getting back to you before again earlier, the story about are these chemicals, what are the dangers of these chemicals? A chemical story is really boring. It's invisible. There's nothing around. Like what, how are you going to visually illustrate this story? How's it going to be good for TV? But when you throw in the story of my investigation of my father layered on top of the story of these chemicals, now you've got something. So that's when they said, okay, we'll do this.
Mhm.
And then I thought, as I was making the film, because I was looking at golf, I also realized that it wasn't just golf courses, it was all playing fields that are maintained where people play, or even parks. And so I decided to make a longer film that went beyond golf and looked into the different playing fields and the hodgepodge of regulations that are around what's being put on playing fields throughout North America, especially in the United States. So that's how the story came together.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that struck me with this particular film in terms of its investigation is the amount of dead ends that you hit, especially in the first, like the beginning of the film with like the canceled town hall meeting. I remember you going there and it just being canceled abruptly. Now I think the students doing eco film that might not run into such dramatic situations, but running into dead ends as you investigate, I'm sure is a fairly common situation. Can you talk about how do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, I think the more truthful you are in your filmmaking, the more endearing the audience becomes to your story. The more you put yourself out there, the more you show, the more you reveal. It's like social media. The deeper you get into your life, the more genuine people find you, the more they'll listen to you. And a dead end may look like a failure. It may feel like a failure. Uh, when you're filming it, you're there, you're like, what the, we came here, we brought cameras, we've spent a week organizing, getting, permissions to get in here. We show up and there's nobody here.
Mm.
Instead of cutting it out of the film, it's like, we need to leave this in the film. And actually, this is better than a meeting because it shows that no one cares. It shows that people aren't engaged in the subject on both sides. This is like a frivolous exercise, this meeting that the people that organized the meeting too, they put together the brochures and they get the data together and they're prepared to present a report and they rent a room and they get all the stuff together. They're probably prepping for this meeting too. And nobody kind of shows up. And what they end up telling me too is that no one really shows up. So what's the problem here? Are they just doing this to check a box? Which raises more questions like, why is this happening without community really engaging and knowing about this? Maybe people aren't showing up because no one knows this meeting's happening. And why does no one know that this meeting's happening? Because maybe they don't want people to know what's going on. They don't want people to know that all of these chemicals are being sprayed in their community, every year and being pumped into the local watershed. So it's a way of silencing things. So that's how you deal that dead end. We turn lemons into lemonade.
The dead end becomes like an essential part of the story.
Yeah, we actually ended up being, I think, a really good point in the story. And you have to look at those things when you're making a film, even when you're shooting it and it seems like it's a dead end and nothing's happening. That maybe later on in the edit suite, you'll be like, wow, I had no clue. Like, I would never disregard anything in the field. The person you interview, that interview wasn't good. I don't think the day went well. yeah, sure, you're gonna feel that, but like, there's always hope, or there's always something that can be pulled from it to keep, because it's so hard to get there, right? It's so
Mm,
hard to get out there and get something shot
mm.
that there's always something there, in my opinion, that you can draw from. I mean, I have another example too. I mean, I don't want to. I mean, well, it's okay. I need to go in all the dead ends. There's many, many, many dead
Oh,
ends.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I've
Yeah.
got the ultimate dead end story
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
another time.
Yeah, but I think what you said about ground war already sort of gives us a very concrete example of how to sort of situate yourself. I want to shift a bit to another kind of question. Our students are obviously not working with a high budget, and I assume when you first started, you're also working with a very low budget. Can you talk about how you make a film with a low budget, or perhaps even no budget?
Oh well, I mean, it's very easy. You make sure you have good sound. Okay, you can have kind of crappy picture, but if you have bad sound, good sound brings up bad picture. So invest in a good microphone and make sure you have good sound. So that's one thing. And the second thing is there is there is no reason if you're making documentaries that you can't make something to showcase your talent or storytelling with no money, because the cameras we have access to, even your phone, are amazing, and and you can't think about it that way. I made garbage with no one's money but my own, and it really wasn't my. It was all made around here, and going around to places. Sure, I had a car, I could go places. I spent some money, but and the other thing too is that you don't need to make it all in a day. You don't. You could make it over time, over a long time. Um, you could one day a week, one evening a week after work, set up an interview every week. Get the first one in the can. It's a snowball. The first one might go, that was great. Now I got an idea because that person spoke about this person. I'm going to go speak to this person. And maybe this person introduced me to that person. And maybe that person will give me access to this place. Because if you show up yourself to to do everything, which is also an important skill to have, framing, focus, clear audio, practice, practice, practice with your phone, the world opens up to you. It's like learning a new language. If you know all those things, now it may not be the best thing that you shoot, or all those things may not be perfect the first time, but you can fix it in post. And the second thing too is that my film Orange Witness, I suggest you watch it, because that film was made with no budget too. And I conducted all my interviews over Skype. I recorded them all. The recordings were fine. The visuals, I decided not to use any visuals of anybody in them, just use their voices like a radio play. And I found public domain film to assemble over all their voices. And then I know a lot of musicians, and I was speaking with Brendan Canning from the Broken Social Scene, who is an old friend of mine, and he had some music and he composed a soundtrack for me. But you don't need like Canada's top indie band to produce a soundtrack for you. It helped, but you could also there's a ton of royalty free music out there to put into your productions too. So, in my opinion, the only thing that's stopping you from making your film is you. You got to go and do it, right? And but the first step is always the hardest. Number one, you can practice with your phone. You can practice framing and sound and export it and put it in an edit program in your computer and play around and create a style for yourself. You could spend a while workshopping and doing that. And then when it comes to research, again, you have free tools, go online, reach out to people, conduct this, or even if you do Skype interviews with people, to hone your interviewing skills. Don't reach out to Elon Musk, because he's probably not going to get back to you, although he does go on some very rogue podcasts, people you never heard of before. But aim for, if there's someone who's running a food bank close by, or a local hero that you maybe read about in a local paper, or you see on a Facebook forum. People probably be thrilled to speak to you, and don't even bother with your phone and camera. Just call them on Skype and record it, and work on your interviewing skills. But again, don't make it an interview, make it a conversation. Because when you're speaking to people, probably 90% to 99% of that will never be used anyways. So all you need is a sound bite, or a good line, or and if you're having a conversation, it'll come out. It'll show up somewhere more in a way that's easier to use, and the energy feels good for your documentary.
Absolutely. I mean, as we're rounding out this conversation that we're having, one last thing I do want to ask you is, the films that these students are making are going to be relatively short films. They roughly have around 4 minutes to tell a story. Yeah, do you have any advice on, like, how do you tell a compelling story within sort of tight span of time?
Well, I mean, there's a beginning, middle, and end. So find your beginning, find your middle, find your end, or find your beginning and end, and then figure out what's going to be the most interesting stuff to go in between. You could, rapidly tell that story with, say, I'm going to do 10 scenes a minute, 10-second scenes, and do 30 scenes like really quickly, make it like, or, but, you can tell a 4-minute story can stick with your audience for the rest of their life, as much as a feature film can. But it is a different skill. Like, short films are a different skill than long films. And I'm not convinced that some people who can do one can do the other. But I do believe that short films are very good at honing the craft. And to make the leap from short to long is complicated, and to think in short 4-minute bites is just as much as a challenge, but it's definitely rewarding. So, but I would never disregard that, and especially the way people consume media. It's like some people are fine with going and having a hamburger at a fast food place, and other people want to go to a nice restaurant and they'll order a hamburger. It's it's the same food, but it's presented in a different way, and both of them might arguably be just as good, right? So I wouldn't discount it, although that wasn't your question, but I would look at it like, this is a challenge. If I can, and there's a lot of things you can transfer from the skills of making that short film that you can transfer into making a longer story. But the beginning, middle, end are really important to know, and map it out on paper before you go make it. Not everyone, but there's a perception out there that the films just get made in the field. Sure, like, stuff happens, but we map it out like a script before we go out here. We say this expert would be good here, followed by this expert in this place and that place, and then when we go in editing, it might be like, that expert's not so good there, we're going to move them over there, or we're going to move this trip to Finland about chewing gum at this part of the film, and we're going to start in Finland because everyone's going to be like, wow, they're in Finland looking at the world's oldest piece of gum. And but then it's like, no, we'll move that later. We're going to go to the Mayan rainforest and trick them into thinking they're watching Indiana Jones. So it's like, but we had a lot of those scenes already mapped out. So with the short film, map it out and test it out, and also give yourself revisions when you write it out. Aim to write 5 revisions, but write them over a week. Write one day, leave it, come the next day, take a look at it, maybe change it. Give yourself time to dream about it, think about it. Like, I can't tell you how many times I wake up from sleep and go, that's it, something that we've been working on. We need to change it. We're cutting a film right now. We've been working on it since February, and we took mid-July, we stopped editing, and we're picking up in September. So we've taken a 6-week break from editing the film, and I'm not looking at it. The editor's on a canoe trip. She's doing this, she's doing that. She's not looking at it. We're going to come back and we're going to look at it. I can guarantee you we're going to be like, we never, we'll have totally different, fresh minds to fix it and reorganize it. So, so perspective is a good thing, and making drafts of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, as you've said kind of early on in this conversation already, writing, how important writing really is. And I like that you add about revising, write and revise, let things change. Those are all very, very important things. And I hope the people watching this will take some key information away from that, and hope it will help.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it's a help for everybody, and please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here to answer any questions that the students might have. I may not be quick to respond, but if they visit takeactionfilms.com, they can watch my older films just by joining the community and checking in and seeing what we're up to. And we have a whole bunch of new films coming out, so we're quite excited about that.
Absolutely. Well, good luck on your new films, and I hope maybe one day we'll see them again in Planet in Focus. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you
Ron.
so much, Andrew.
Thank you for your time. See ya.
Yeah.